Her blood was violet, and there was a lot of it. I almost did not see her. I had been walking the maintenance corridor on the lower deck of Palava Station for no reason other than I could not sit still anymore. 11 hours of waiting on a cargo clearance will do that to a person. My boots were loud on the metal grating, the amber ceiling lights were dim and tired, and the whole corridor smelled like warm circuitry and recycled air. I was not looking for anything. I was just moving, the way I always do when something is eating at me and I cannot name what it is. She was tucked into the gap between two atmospheric regulator units, pressed so far into the shadow that if I had been walking any faster, I would have passed her completely. My name is Caleb Ward. I am 31 years old. I haul cargo on the outer corridor circuit, which means I spend most of my life in transit zones like this one, surrounded by machinery and strangers, waiting on paperwork and delayed manifests. I am not a soldier. I am not trained in medicine. I am not anyone special. But I stopped. She was small, maybe half a head shorter than me, with fine scales along her neck and forearms that caught the amber light in a way that made them look almost like hammered copper. Her face was angular, more narrow than a human face, with large dark eyes that were half closed and pointed somewhere past my shoulder at nothing. One arm was bent at an angle that made my stomach drop the moment I registered it, and beneath her, spreading slowly through the grating, was the violet. I crouched down fast. She heard me and flinched, a sharp, reflexive tightening of her whole body, and I held both hands up immediately. "Easy," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could. "I am not going to hurt you. I can see you are hurt. I just want to help." Her eyes moved to my face. They were very dark, almost black, and even in that condition, even bleeding and exhausted, and clearly in pain, there was something in them that was completely alert. She was watching me, the way a person watches someone they cannot yet decide about. Measuring, calculating behind the pain. She made a sound. My translation unit clipped on my belt crackled and spat out fragments. Not enough to build a full sentence. Just sounds that could have been words in a language the unit did not have full coverage for. I unclipped my emergency kit from my belt. Every hauler on the outer corridor carries one, not because the station requires it, but because you spend enough time in places where proper medical help is 20 minutes away, and you learn fast. Mine was rated for multi-species trauma, which meant it had compression wraps calibrated for a range of anatomies and a thermal sheet rated down to -40. I opened it on the floor in front of her, so she could see everything I was doing. No surprises. "I am going to put a pressure wrap on the bleeding," I said. "I am going to go slowly. If I do something wrong, make noise and I will stop." I did not know if she understood, but she did not move away. The wrap went on at the lowest pressure setting. I watched the spread of violets slow and then stop. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. The thermal sheet went over her next, tucked carefully around her without moving her arm, which I was not going to touch without knowing what I was doing. The arm was a problem for someone more qualified than me. I sat down on the grating beside her. The metal was cold through my clothes. My lower back started complaining within about 2 minutes. I shifted slightly, found a position that was marginally better, and stayed there. She watched me sit down. She watched me stay. That expression came back to her face, the measuring one, the one that was trying to figure out what I was. "You should not be alone right now," I said. It was not a complicated thought. It just seemed true. Time moved strangely after that. Station time at that hour feels disconnected from everything, like the rest of the universe has gone to sleep and left you in a pocket of quiet that is just a little too still. The regulator units hummed. The grating was cold. I checked her breathing every few minutes, watching the rise and fall of her chest under the thermal sheet, and each time it was steady, I felt the tight thing in my chest loosen a fraction. Around what my unit told me was close to 4 in the morning, she spoke again. The translator caught more this time. "Why?" it rendered. Just the one word, but clearly a question. I thought about it seriously, because it was a serious question. "Because you are hurt," I said. "And it is cold in here, and no one should be alone when they are hurt." She was quiet for a long time after that. Her eyes stayed on me, and there was something shifting in them that I could not read. Whatever it was, it did not look like fear anymore. I pulled out a ration bar from my jacket pocket, the good kind with actual flavor, unwrapped it, and started eating slowly, because I was starting to feel the hour pulling at me, and I could not afford to sleep. I thought about offering her a piece, and then thought better of it immediately. I had no idea what her biology could and could not handle. The last thing she needed was an allergic reaction on top of everything else. "Sorry," I said, holding the bar up slightly. "I would offer you some, but I genuinely do not know what is safe for you. When someone comes who knows more than me, we will get you something proper." She blinked, slow and deliberate. I had learned from years on the outer corridor that a slow blink is one of those gestures that crosses species lines more often than not, something close to acknowledgement. I kept talking, low and even. The way you talk in the dark when talking is the only useful thing left to do. I told her about the Seedstock Manifest, the whole ridiculous situation, how 11 hours of my life had been consumed by a misfiled origin code on agricultural supplies. I told her about the Mira's Patience, my ship, named after my grandmother who had been the most patient person I had ever known, and also the most stubborn. I told her about the outer corridor circuit, the strange beauty of the fringe settlements, the way certain stations smelled like specific things that you could always recognize even years later. I do not know how much she understood, but her breathing stayed even, and her eyes stayed open, and that was enough. At some point between 4 and 5 in the morning, something changed in the corridor. It was not a sound exactly. It was more like a pressure shift, the subtle way air moves when something is moving through it at a distance. I felt it more than heard it. I went very still. She felt it too. Her eyes sharpened immediately, the exhaustion burning off the surface of them, and she said something fast and low that my translator could not keep up with. But her body had changed. She was not an injured stranger anymore. She was something else entirely in that moment, something that had been waiting underneath the pain and the blood loss, something that knew exactly what that pressure shift meant. I did not ask questions. I just sat closer and kept my hands visible. 60 seconds later, I heard the footsteps. Multiple sets, coordinated, moving fast from both ends of the corridor simultaneously. I was on my feet before I had fully decided to stand, and I had both hands up before the first figure came around the corner. 6 of them, armored in something I did not recognize, helmets sealed, weapons raised. They moved like people who had trained together for a long time, each one covering a specific angle, without being told, communication happening through posture alone. I did not move. I kept my hands exactly where they were. They saw her first. There was a pause in their movement, a fraction of a second where the coordination cracked slightly, and that crack told me everything. That pause was not tactical. That pause was personal. She spoke from behind me. Her voice was different now, stronger. Whatever reserve she had been saving, she spent them on those words. Her tone was not the voice of someone asking for help. It was the voice of someone giving instructions. Every weapon in that corridor dropped. The figure at the front of the group moved forward and crouched beside her. Rapid exchange. I caught fragments through my translator. Words like recovery, and stable, and perimeter, and the corridor between my boots. Then the figure looked up at me. "You stayed with her." The translator rendered it flat, but I heard something underneath the words that was not quite flat. "The entire night." "Yes," I said. "You did not know who she was." "No," I said. "I just knew she was hurt." There was a long pause. Behind the helmet, I could not read anything, but the pause itself said something. "Why did you not leave to get help?" the figure asked. I had thought about this at some point during the night, I realized. Not in a formal way, not as a question worth answering out loud, but in the quiet background way that the mind works through things when the hands are busy and the body is cold and the only job is to keep watch. "Because getting help takes time," I said, and she was bleeding, and I did not want her to be alone if the time ran out. Another long pause. Then the group moved with efficiency and care, a contained emergency response that had clearly been trained for exactly this scenario. They had a medical unit assembled on the floor within 90 seconds. They had the arms stabilized in under 3 minutes. They were ready to move within 5. She looked at me one last time before they carried her out. I do not know how to describe what was in her eyes. I am not a poet. I am a hauler with a sore back and a cold coffee waiting for me somewhere above my head. But whatever it was direct, and it was complete. and it was something I was not going to forget. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the corridor, with the violet still drying on the grating, and the hum of the regulators, and the cold metal, and the amber light. I stood there for a moment. Then I went upstairs, found my coffee, and drank it cold. My cargo cleared at 2 in the afternoon. I loaded the Mira's patients, ran my checks, and left Palava Station without knowing her name, without knowing who she was, without knowing that the people who had tried to kill her were already in custody one level above where I had been sitting, without knowing any of it. I thought about her occasionally in the months that followed, the dark eyes, the measuring look, the slow blink. I hoped she had recovered. I hoped the arm had healed clean. It was a quiet hope, the kind that lives in the background and does not demand anything, the kind you carry without realizing you are carrying it. 7 years passed. I was in the break room of a transit depot on Kepler Station, eating a sandwich, when the broadcast came on. It was running on every screen in the place, which told me it was something significant before I had even looked up. The Palava Accords were being signed that day. Every network was covering it. The first comprehensive agreement between the Terran Cooperative and the Vale Conclave, two civilizations that had been circling each other carefully for the better part of a decade. The speaker at the podium was small, angular face, dark eyes, fine scales along her neck and forearms. I stopped eating. Her name was Thesavari, and she was the heir to the Vale Conclave, and she was standing at a podium in front of billions of people, and she was talking about a maintenance corridor on Palava Station 7 years ago. She did not say my name, but she described me exactly: the cargo hauler, the emergency kit, the ration bar, the thermal sheet, the cold floor. She described the whole night in a way that told me she had turned it over in her mind many times, the way you turn over a thing that meant something to you. She said that people kept asking her why she had pushed so hard for this treaty, why she had spent 7 years making the political case for a partnership with a species that many in the conclave did not fully trust. She said she told them all the same thing. She said, "A human found me when I was dying, and it never once occurred to him to leave." She said, "He did not know who I was. He did not ask. It seemed not to matter to him in any way that was measurable." She said, "That is the species I am choosing to stand beside." The break room was completely silent. Everyone in it was watching the screen. I sat there with my sandwich halfway to my mouth, and I felt something strange move through me that I did not have a clean name for. It was not pride exactly. Pride felt too loud for what it was. It was quieter than that. It was something closer to the feeling of understanding, finally, what a night was actually for. She finished her address. The crowd in the broadcast responded in a way that my translator could not fully capture, but the sound of it carried through the screen anyway. I put my sandwich down. I looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it up again and finished it, because I had a run to the fringe settlements in 4 hours, and I needed to eat. Outside the window of the break room, the Mira's patient sat in the dock, patient as she always was, waiting to carry me to the next corridor, the next manifest, the next cold cup of coffee in the middle of the night. I did not think of myself as someone who had done something remarkable. I had just stayed. That is all it had ever been. A man on a cold floor in the dark, with his hands visible and his mouth quiet, keeping watch until morning. Apparently that was enough to matter. Apparently that was enough to change the shape of two civilizations. I finished my sandwich. I put on my jacket. I went back to work.